and can go away in an instant. We saw that with he who shall not be named. Okay, welcome everyone to Your Story Adds Power here at Move On's Progressive Power Summit. My name is Bakir.
Elyssa.
And we're gonna get started now. So first, we're gonna go over some housekeeping guidelines for our session. These are standard norms and operating procedures that we do in our community just to get us started on the right note. First, you can read through our community agreements. The first one is, we want you to come as you are. We want folks to show up to the space as their authentic selves. And we want you all to trust lived experience. We want you to know that you are the experts on your own lives and that that is valuable, that has meaning, and that you should always speak your truth as you see it. And then know yourself. We understand that topics addressed at this summit may bring up different things for each of us, and we trust you to stay in touch with yourself throughout all of it and take breaks, seek support as needed. We are here to help you with anything if you're struggling. Make space, take space. This is a virtual space, and in-person spaces have different comfort levels and different ways of engaging. So find your way that works and stick with it. And then one diva, one mic. At Move On, we like to use stacking, which just means typing the word stack in the chat if you want to speak or share. We'll get to that a little bit later when we do a little practice round. But these are our community agreements, and feel free to use the chat throughout the entire session to share how you're feeling about things, to share details. We're talking about storytelling here, so talk to each other, share each other's stories, get to know one another, connect with your attendees, ask questions, share questions. We all want to get to know each other and build this community because our collective voices really fit into a chorus for change when we come together. Don't use the chat to promote your organization or business or share external links, share information that's not relevant to the content, or send the same message repeatedly. But I don't think we're going to do that. I trust y'all. So we'll do a little bit of a deeper introduction right now. As we heard earlier, for those of you that joined early, my name is Bakir Konakovic. I use he, him pronouns. I am the community support organizer here at Move On. I was born, raised, and living currently in St. Petersburg, Florida, the Sunshine City, the greatest city in America, in my opinion. And I'm also a first-generation American, the only child of Bosnian Muslim war refugees, and that is my proudest accomplishment.
My name is Alyssa Fader. I am the executive director of Rising Organizers Action. Some of you have, I saw in the chat, have come to my other sessions for my lame but fun jokes. So I'm glad to see some familiar names. I live in DC, but I'm from New Jersey, and I act like it. I talk very quickly is mostly what I mean. So if I start speaking too fast, please let me know. And I am, in terms of my identity, I'm an organizer. I'm a cis, white, progressive Jewish woman, and I'm happy to be here. Great. Okay, so I'm going to get us started by talking about why stories matter. So you all have heard throughout this conference all about how you can drop off or you can record your story, and I want to talk about why that is so important for the work that you're doing. Go to the next slide. Thank you. Stories allow us to do things that are really powerful. They allow us to demonstrate our values. So it's really easy for me to show up in a space and say, I am anti-racist. But what does that mean? How can I demonstrate to somebody else that they should believe me, that they know what that means and that they can trust me? I do that by telling a story. It also is able to disrupt assumptions. So perhaps you have an assumption about someone, or rather someone else has an assumption about you and the kind of person that you are. You can tell a story that will disrupt that. You can use stories also to make a point in a way that's difficult to dispute. And I really want to emphasize this because we are currently living in this mushy fact world. I'm not going to call us post-fact yet because I still have hope, but we are living in a world in which people are yelling facts, or in the case of the other side, facts, back and forth at each other in a way that is just hitting walls. And that is really challenging part of what stories allow you to do is make a point in a way that's difficult to dispute. So if you find yourself, trying to convince somebody to get a vaccine and they're yelling to you all sorts of misinformation, a way to disrupt that information is actually to tell a story. And we'll get into examples about all of this in just a second. They equalize and humanize. So just from our conversation today, Bakir is the son of refugees. He probably has a really impactful story that humanizes the stories of refugees, but they also equalize. What I mean by that is that they make it so that you don't have to be an expert on everything. You are not required to be the world's expert on vaccines in order for you to tell a story about why vaccines are important to you. You are able to just be the expert on your own lived experience. And that's reflected in our norms here at the conference. Stories also demonstrate vulnerability. So similarly to being able to talk about your story, they really allow someone into your experience. Vulnerability is a really big word. I sort of have my own organizing definition of it in this context. And what I mean by it is you're inviting someone into your experiences with you. You're inviting them to live an experience that you had alongside you and to really become a part of your story. Stories are also going to elicit other stories. So you'll see in a second, I'm gonna I'll tell my story, and you're gonna see some ways in which, and we'll come back to the slide after actually, and we'll talk about how who's getting stories brought up for them as I tell my story. I would love to hear that. And stories ultimately inspire others to act. Because we are able to demonstrate our values, because we are able to disrupt assumptions, we are able to inspire others to take action with us by sharing our stories. So if we go to the next slide, all that is to say that stories help us show others what we care about or what our self-interest is. So self-interest is a person's values and motivations. It is not the same thing as selfishness. And when we first hear that word, this word self-interest, it can sound like selfishness. It's not. It's a completely different concept. It basically means someone's values and their morals, their motivations, their reasons for getting out of bed in the morning. The reason that you all are here at this conference on a beautiful, at least in DC, beautiful Saturday afternoon. So put in the chat why you're here so we can see everybody's self-interests. But it's going to vary because you want to protect American democracy, because you want to make sure that healthcare is expanded to more people. All of those reasons are your self-interest. So if we go to the next slide, Ben wants to learn about stories. Great. I'll give you an example right now. Great. Keep populating your self-interest in the chat. And I'm going to give you an example of my public narrative, my story. And then Bakir, let's actually go back to the why story slide afterwards, if that's okay. So I want to take you all back with me to January of 2011. I was working as a barista in a Starbucks in a mall in New Jersey. New Jersey is very core to my identity. And I actually had the day off. I was at home watching what the Republicans try to shut down the government over Planned Parenthood's budget. This has become kind of normal at this point, Republicans shutting down the government because of abortion rights. But it was the first time it had happened, actually, this particular set of circumstances. And I was riveted. I was watching it on TV. I had just graduated from college with a degree in women's studies. And I thought felt like I knew a lot of things and was really invested. And while I was watching, my dad asked me to go with him to the mall where I work, which was very annoying because I had the day off. But he wanted to go shopping for pans, and I just wanted to avoid a guilt trip. And so I went with him. And I went with him partially because I knew that the food court was always showing C-SPAN. For some reason, this food court in New Jersey was always showing C-SPAN and infomercials, and that was it. So while he went off to Williams-Sonoma, I went to the food court and we're standing on these red tiles watching this debate take place on the floor of the House of Representatives. And this Republican guy from Texas, Ted Poe, he's retired since then, got up and started saying all sorts of falsehoods about abortion, reproductive rights, Planned Parenthood. And I was standing on these tiles with the sound of the sushi place behind me, and I was livid. I was so angry because I, like I said, had just graduated with this degree, and I thought that I was so smart and powerful. And I knew what he was saying was a lie. I knew what he was saying was false. And I wanted to just jump into the TV screen and grab the mic from him and explain to him all the reasons why it is that I thought that he was wrong. And then I realized at basically the same moment that that wouldn't matter. It didn't matter that I knew more facts. It didn't matter that I was right. What mattered in that moment was that he was a member of Congress on the floor of the House of Representatives, and I was a 22-year-old in a food court in New Jersey. And that meant that I had no power to do anything at all. And I realized that I had a choice. I was planning to get my PhD. I really wanted to be an academic because I wanted to understand everything about the world. I thought that if I knew everything, I could fix it. But I realized in that moment that that wasn't actually true. And so I had the choice of, do I continue on this path in which I pursue academia, I pursue accumulation of knowledge, or do I try and build the kind of power that combats this kind of misinformation, that stops people with power who are misusing that power to harm people? That was the choice that was in front of me. And I didn't know what organizing was at the time. I'd never heard of it before. But that was when I became an organizer, because that was the moment when I realized what I needed to do and what you all need to do is build power to build the kind of future that we want. So if we go back to the why stories slide, that's me. I'm curious if folks can put, actually one before, thank you, Bakir. Put in the chat where you saw any of these 7 things in the story that I just told you. And no story is going to have all 7, I should say, but tell me if you learned about my values, and if so, what my values were. If I disrupted any assumptions, if I humanized myself, if a story came up for you, if my story reminded you of your own experience, I would love for you to put that in the chat as well. And if you're like, yeah, I really want to build some power, if you feel inspired to act, put that in the chat too. So let's give 30 seconds for that, and then I will put us back onto slide 14. Put it in the chat. Great. Kimberly was inspired to act. I did it. I can go home now. Thank you, Kimberly. Sandra said that the story is powerful to help motivate us. Maddie said that I humanized myself. It related to everyday individuals by telling a story you felt familiar with. I get that a lot when I tell this story because it's pretty normal, right? I was just in a mall. You felt my anger, which is vulnerability, right? Like I brought you into those feelings with me. Felt very inspired to act as a young person in Pennsylvania. I feel like there's not a lot you can do. There's so much you can do, and you can become an organizer. And we connected. Great. Okay. Excellent. So now you see how these things play out in stories. So if we can jump back to the public narrative slide, Bakir. Thank you for coming on a tour with me. Okay. So what I just told you is a story, and stories are another way of talking about stories is something called a public narrative. So a public narrative is an organizing term, and it's a way of sharing a story or experience that motivates others to take action. We did it. And a public narrative has 3 parts. If we click, oops, there we go. Okay, great. So the first part of a public narrative is your story of self. That is the choices and moments that led you to action. What you just heard is my story of self, or one of them. If something's coming up for you, you're like, oh my God, I have so many experiences. Great, you just have a lot of stories. It's not a problem. You just heard my story of self because it was about the choices and moment that led me to become an organizer. There's 2 other parts of a public narrative, and we're going to get to it over the course of this training. So if we go to the next slide. As I said, it's a story that demonstrates why you are the way you are and why you're involved in this work. It shows your values and your self-interest. If you can identify what my values were in my story, drop it in the chat while I'm talking. And it highlights your unique personal experience that led you to action. For me, it was being in a food court. Sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles, you know? And story of self has 3 parts. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. It has 3 parts. The first is challenge. The second is choice. And the last is outcome. So yes, Stephanie, it is another cookie metaphor. That is an inside joke for those of you who have watched the Organizing 101 training. But yes, so tell me what the challenge was in my story. What was the challenge that I was facing? Misinformation, absolutely. I was watching lies on my TV from people with power, right? And what was the choice that I was facing? What were the 2 choices I had to make? Exactly, to make a decision about school or activism. Perfect, Rachel. And what was the outcome of having made that choice? The choice that I made. I know you guys are still typing, but I'm here, right? I became an organizer. Yeah, my life's work. Like I really changed my entire universe because of Ted Poe, Republican from Texas. So you can see the way that my story is really structured in this way. And this structure is really important because it's the thing that lets you take an experience, a thing that happened to you, and turn it into a powerful story. If I just showed up and I said, yeah, I was at the mall and Ted Poe said this thing and it really pissed me off, that's not really going to motivate you. But this structure allows for you to change that experience, this thing that happened, into something powerful. So when you're thinking about your story, and we're going to get to that in just a second, and here, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. There are a few best practices that I want to highlight. One is to include salient details. So again, I ask you to type in the chat because I love an interactive training. What were some details you heard in my story? Details that stood out to you. This is just me missing in-person trainings. You heard the sushi place, right? I really did. I heard them chopping away back there. I was standing on the red tiles. There was the TV. My father went to Williams-Sonoma, right? I put in lots of details. Yes, exactly, Liv. Really descriptive and remembered lots of vivid details. The reason I did that, the reason I incorporated those pieces was because I want to bring you into that story with me. And when you're able to visualize something that looks like your hometown mall with your hometown sushi place in the food court, it allows for you to have a deeper resonance with my story. So including salient details, colors, sounds, smells is really helpful. You also want to get vulnerable. Again, we talked about vulnerable doesn't mean I'm going to ask you to tell a story that you are uncomfortable with. What I'm going to ask is that you invite me into that experience with you. So you said, some of you said earlier that a piece of the vulnerability in my story was that you saw how angry I was. And I was, and I still am. I've told that story maybe 100 times, and every time I'm still just as mad. And that's vulnerability. Any emotion that you are able to show in your story is vulnerable. And the last piece is just to say I a lot. Often when people are first learning to tell their stories, they say things like, when you see something like that, you have to act. But actually, most people see bad stuff all the time and don't act. So I want to know why you did. I want to hear you say, when I saw something like that, I had to act because. That is going to change your story from being sort of like vague, moralizing to something that really tells you about, tells the other person about you and your values. And Amir, it's not bad to say I a lot in the story of self. there's other parts of public narrative. There's other types of things you want to do as an organizer. But when you're talking about story of self, it is about you because your values are universal. So even though you're talking about yourself, you're still going to be able to have a story that resonates with others. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand it back over to Bakir.
All right, everyone. So we're going to talk about creating your story of self. And something that I just want to plant in your minds right now at the start is to simplify this and understand it really in a clear way. The most important thing that you can do here is to speak from the heart about the experiences that you have, that your friends, family, community have. Your truth is power. Your story is power. Never forget that. Always, always, always speak up for what you're experiencing with the issues and with the actions needed to get us to the solutions. That's what we do here at Move On. That's the Move On way. We want to center the people experiencing the pain, the trauma, the issues at the heart of the activism around fixing the problem. So keep that in your minds and always remember that speaking up and out about these issues is the best way to bring about change in a collective, dramatic fashion, which is what we're all waiting for. So what we're going to do now is get ready to practice and see a model example of telling your story and then coaching your storytellers that you engage with to get them to do an even better job. But first, I want each of you to take a moment and to review your own story of self. So as you work on your own for a little bit, I want you to ask yourself and answer these questions. So first, in your story, what was the challenge that you were facing? Okay. Then write down what choice you made on how to deal with that challenge. Then, just like Alyssa modeled, what was the outcome of making that choice? And then throughout all of it, what details can you emphasize in your story to make it most effective? I want each and every one of you to really take some time here. I'll give you at least 2, maybe 3 minutes to run through it, and we'll just sit, share in the chat if you want any of these answers, get to know each other. This is a good moment to really workshop and just get us in the right mind space to share and understand how we're listening and hearing these stories later when we model them. And if you have any questions about any of these concepts, please post them in the chat. The challenge can be anything, right? It could be the fact that my mother and father came to this country to escape oppression, and they still haven't felt total freedom because they work full-time and overtime and have worked themselves into the ground, sometimes to sickness, and we live in a system, a healthcare system that doesn't treat them the way that they should as human beings unless they're willing to put up whatever money they can scrap to actually live their lives with the human right of healthcare. That could be the challenge. What choice do you make? You can go out to rallies, protests, call your Congress member, right? You can try to get these issues passed through, resolved through legislation, through advocacy. Relational, just talking to your peers one-on-one, going to school board meetings, you know. These are all choices that we make to fix issues. And then what are the outcomes of these choices? Heck, hopefully a bill gets passed, right, into law. That would be the most wonderful thing in the world. We have an infrastructure package that's on the brink. How do you do everything that you can to make sure that these things happen, these outcomes happen? You make choices to raise your voice, to speak up and speak out. And then throughout all of this, layer it with details. Layer it with details. Let us know. Give us a visual. Show. Don't just tell. Put us in the position that you were or still are in. Make us feel what you're feeling. That's what we want. We're craving that as people, as human beings. All right. Now, keep writing down your answers, share in the chat, and I am going to get us ready to listen to a model of a story. And then something that we do on Move On Storytelling team, we have volunteers who serve as coaches and peer mentors to help you craft your story. And we're going to see an example of that coaching at the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dylan Foster. And as he tells us his story, I would like you each to think about what the challenge is that he's facing, what the choice is that he makes, what happens as a result of that choice, what details stand out to you, and then what did you learn about his self-interest, his values, his purpose? Why is he doing it? With that, Dylan, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. He, him. I'm 23. I come from a family that's very white nationalist and ideals. I come from a town that's very white nationalist and ideals. And, but I wasn't very politically aware until I was roughly 18. And around that time, I moved to Oregon to pursue playing hockey. And while I was there, someone that lived around the corner from me, one of my neighbors there, had been lynched the day after President Trump had announced his support for David Duke. To me, that was really, really appalling, and that's what got me to start paying attention to politics. And around the time that, as things continued to get worse and worse, I paid more and more attention, and I felt more urgency, but I didn't necessarily understand how to get involved until around the time of the pandemic, when things got really bad with the death of George Floyd and all the people dying because of the pandemic. And around that time, I started to organize and have difficult conversations and whatnot, which caused some strain in my own life, being that my family didn't agree with it at all, and the people from my hometown didn't necessarily agree with it at all. But for me personally, that didn't. I spent like a lot of time by myself, or a lot of time with my communities, that my organizing communities. But I don't necessarily feel that it was as lonely or that difficult because of the solidarity and friendships that I developed while organizing. And additionally, I have the privilege to be able to make change, which I feel a lot of urgency to because of the situations going on around me, where in my hometown, it can be any kind of white nationalist event that happens from day to day, whether it be the Trump train going through town or just something racist happening. I feel a lot of urgency to organize, but at the same time, I feel a lot of solidarity and I feel like the communities around me that also organize make it feel less lonely.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for sharing. What you all just saw was an example of a story of self, and it's very real and vulnerable and just true in his own reality and experience. That's something that moves mountains. And now you get to hear from one of our volunteers on the Move On Storytelling team, actually the storytelling team leader, Miss Lyn Malone, as she presents some coaching.
Hi, Dylan. I think you did a fabulous job sharing your story. You were very honest about your experiences, and that's awesome. Can you tell me, first of all, how do you think you presented your story?
I think I did all right. We're not expected to be perfect. I paused a little bit too much. I said maybe a little bit too much, but I got the bulk of what I wanted, or of how I feel and what I wanted to say it out there.
That's very true. I think we can work with the ums and the pauses and things like that. What I heard was a very clearly defined story of you and the experiences that you've had. As time goes on and you tell your story more, like I heard Alyssa say she told hers about 100 times. By the time you tell yours 100 times, you're going to be, and me too, we're going to get much better. But I appreciate the boldness that you had today to talk about your story because it's impacting. And a lot of people your age are going to be very strategic in helping us to understand even the ramifications of dealing with a white supremacist neighborhood. I personally understand what you're talking about because I'm originally from Texas, and just to know that I connect with you that way, and we're like a bridge. We're not the same generation, but I appreciate you and your age group talking about this. When I was 23 years old, I experienced basically what you're talking about growing up in Texas. So it really resonates with me. And that's what stories do. They bring alive a memory in people try to hide, and we don't need to hide it. So I want to encourage you as you tell your story to really feel the power of who you are. Feel the power of your words. Own every aspect of it. And as you write more of your story, this was just a portion of it today, because we don't have enough time. But as you write more of your story, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get more details involved. You're going to get more things that we can actually see. And I'll have to tell you something, because I am from Texas. I saw the hanging. I actually saw the hanging, not the person that was your neighbor, but I saw what happened in Texas. So vividly, you took me back to that place to where maybe I can tell that part of my story, because it's still really part of my story. So that's what we do. We elicit actions and feelings and emotions from people in our own story. So I truly appreciate you today, Dylan. Powerful. And I'm looking forward to working with you more and more and more, because behind what you said today, you have a lot more to say. And I am just so very proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Thank you so much, Miss Evelyn. Excellent example of a story and of a great coaching mentor there to help guide us. You just saw us partake in community and collective action, because now we have a vision as far as where we can go, with this information, and that's going to take us all the further. So thank you all both again, and I'm going to hand it back off to Alyssa now to tell us about some more aspects of public narrative.
More stories, more fun. Wonderful.
I'll share the screen. Get going.
Thank you. And thank you, Evelyn and Dylan, for your story and feedback. So that we've just heard two examples of story of self. They're very different. We heard mine, we heard Dylan's. We also actually got a little bit of Miss Evelyn's, didn't we, when she was coaching. So we've talked about how public narrative has three parts. I want to get to that second part and describe a little bit about what it means. So the second part is, as it says here, the story of us. So if we go to the next slide. The story of us is about the shared stories of people with similar self-interests that lead us to action. This is kind of a vague concept when you first get introduced to it, but we have a real life example actually in this training. So Dylan told us our story, his story of self, and Miss Evelyn told us her story of self. Next time Dylan tells that story, he can say his story of self, and then he can say, this is not just something that happened to me. It also happened to my friend, Miss Evelyn. And then he can share a couple of sentences of her story. She grew up in Texas. She saw lynchings in her community. The thing that Story of Us allows us to do is, if we go to the next slide, getting ahead of myself here, is connect our personal experience to a larger systemic struggle. So it allows for Dylan to say, I saw this lynching and it horrified me. And I am not the only, this is not just something that happened in my community, it happened all the way in Texas. And because it happened in my community and in Miss Evelyn's community and maybe in somebody else's community, almost certainly in someone else's community, that means it's not just a me problem, it's an us problem. That's where the us is. The us is the community, the larger structural problem that we're trying to address. It also allows for you to say, as we often do in our movements, that the personal is political. It is not just something that happened to you. You are not alone. And in fact, because you are not alone, that's why you have power. This is the story of us is actually kind of secretly my favorite organizing concept, because when you start to internalize that this thing that was really bad that happened to you is not just you, but also all these other people, that means you're able to do something about it, right? If something's not going well for me and it's only affecting me, I have no power. It's just me. But if it's happening to all of us, then we have the ability to come together and organize around it. And that's because a we problem is not better, but stronger from an organizing perspective than a me problem. It is a way for us to really come together and organize. And then I want to talk about the final section, which is the story of now. So you've talked about, here's my experience. Here's the experience of other people like me who have experienced something similar. And now, what am I going to do about it? So a story of now is really an ask. It's what are the next steps and challenges that you're going to take on together? So I'm curious in the chat, just let's be creative. You've heard Dylan's story. You've heard Miss Evelyn's story. What are some things that they could do, that we could do together as a community now that we've heard those stories? What do you want to do next? There's no correct answer here. Just toss things out into the world. Thank you, Anisa, for dropping the questions in the chat. You can march in the streets, absolutely, Bakir. You might want to, this is a really big one, right? But you might want to go fight racism in America, right? Like that's the kind of story that really lends itself to being able to turn and say that, like, these experiences are why racism in America is so violent and so important to fight. And you can make the ask anything more specific from there, like Jonathan is saying. That's why we're phone banking and text banking to get this law passed. That's why I want to bring these things to the public eye. Absolutely. So you can see that your story really allows for you to motivate people to act and give them a specific ask and a specific way forward. So all of that is to say, next slide, that public narrative is amazing and stories are really powerful. They allow for you to demonstrate your values, to bring others into your movement, to motivate others to act, to build relationships, and relationships are power. Public narratives also have three parts. They have the story of self, us, and now. Most of what we've talked about today has been the story of self. Well, we've talked about the other two. And the story of self has its own three parts: challenge, choice, and outcome. And the more you hone in on that particular structure, the more powerful your story is going to be. So I want to see if anybody has any questions at this moment in time on anything we've talked about so far before we move into talking about how you can share your story with Move On. And I'm going to have some Diet Coke because I need to be caffeinated at all times, to be honest.
Throw any and all questions you all might have in the chat. Anything at all.
Amir, thank you for asking that question because I was about to plant it myself. Amir says, what if me, are boring and don't have a compelling story? Amir, I have to tell you, the bones of my story are really boring. It's literally just me hanging out in a food court. And that's part of why I tell it in this training. Every time I run this training, people ask that question, Amir. They say, I don't have a story. I don't have an experience. And when I first got trained, I felt the exact same way. And that's just because this is a new skill that you're learning. But I promise you, and I've been doing this for 10 years, so I know that I'm right on this particular instance. If you think about why you are at this training, what got you involved in Move On? What pissed you off about Trump? What makes you want to keep going? All of those things have moments and experiences that dot along the way. In fact, I would argue you probably have so many stories, you're overwhelmed right now. That's not a bad thing. So what I would instead challenge you to do is try to get really specific about a conversation or a moment in which something resonated or changed for you. And using this structure, I promise you, and I really can promise, you will figure out how to make it a really powerful story. You will be able to change it from, I went to the mall and it was really annoying to have to go to the mall, to like, actually, I changed my entire life in a mall and a food court in New Jersey. You can do that. I've seen it happen 100 times. And I want to also uplift this point from Dylan, which is that he felt that his story was not compelling until he told it to a few people. And I think that that's also really important. Like you lived it, so it's not interesting to you, but it's interesting to other people. Any other questions? I just love to pontificate on that one. So thank you all for coming along on that journey with me. What are some examples of empowering approaches to invite the action and encourage joining participation together? I mean, Stephanie, that is a huge question. Bakir, do you want to take this one?
Right, because this is what we do as activists and as organizers. Examples of empowering approaches to invite action and encourage joining participation together. So we're talking here about solidarity. We're talking about collective movements. Move On, Rising Organizers, we work in a movement, in the progressive movement. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of organizations, a lot of entities coming together with a lot of different passions, a lot of different issues that we care about, right? It's a multi-issue world. Most all issues are intersectional too. Racial justice intersects with climate justice, intersects with transportation, intersects with jobs. All of these things matter, right? And so what are we talking about here? It's just sharing your experiences in any number of these issues with someone else that may also be experiencing the same thing. And then that happens one more time. And then it happens again. And by the time you know it, you found an organizing community like Dylan did. You know, can you imagine what it's like being alone in a red district and to still not feel lonely? To feel more urgency even. That's Dylan's experience because he found a community. He found a group of people where we have a vision, we have a goal, we have a voice that when it comes together, it's like a chorus for change. It moves mountains because you can't stop all of us when we come together and say, hey, this is what's what, this isn't right, this is what we need, we demand it now, you're gonna listen to us. So that's what it is, it's advocacy. It's advocacy at the heart of what we do. And it's joining communities where you can do that together. Because you'll get tired, you know, that's gonna always happen. It's a struggle for a reason. And you're gonna feel it and you're gonna feel overwhelmed and tired and like you can't do it again. But guess what? Like Miss Evelyn did to me last night, sent me a text message, said, hey, I appreciate and respect the time and hours you're putting in here. You're doing good work, we need it. I needed that, I really truly did. Talk to each other, let each other know what you're doing. Share in that community, in that shared struggle, because that's how we make the change that we wanna see. I'll hop off my soapbox. I get a little passionate here.
You and me both, buddy. I think that's all the questions we have for now. Maybe we'll have some more at the end.
Cool. Well, with that, y'all, I'm gonna talk to you about a way for y'all to share your stories with us in the world. It's Move On's member stories. Hashtag my Move On story. We love hashtags. So what are we doing here? So the My Move On Story program is essentially just us trying to support and uplift and empower you all to share your voices, share your personal stories on the experiences, issues, actions, and solutions that you care most about through Move On's activism. I mentioned it earlier when I talked about the Move On way. We want to center the people at the heart of the issues that are happening out. We want them to lead the way towards change. And there's no better way to do that than to share your story far and wide. We constantly hear from elected officials, movement leaders, other key political influencers that Move On members, people like you, just like you, every single one of you, I promise, are the most important, powerful messengers when it comes to creating change. Stories can have huge impact, persuades legislators to vote on bills, helps get people out to vote in elections. God, we know how important that is, don't we? We learned our lesson. It inspires others to get involved. It's unstoppable. So How do we do this? We have a link. You can go to moveon.org/mymoveonstory. And there you'll get our easy 1, 2, 3-step process on how to discover your story, craft your story, and then share your story. You'll also find a toolkit that we have that shares a wealth of information and knowledge on core issues that MoveOn's working on, so you can have direct things to talk about in your story, direct calls to action. You have details on the issues. Everything that you can possibly need is in there. And then on that website, you can directly upload your story, whether it's a video or a picture or anything. It's creative activism. We want to accept any number of creative ways that you can share your story. And then at the bottom, we have a contact information form where you can tell us your name, phone number, email address, and when you do submit your story to us, we're going to round back up with you later, and we're going to work together on making it everything that you want it to be. We don't do a single thing without your permission. I want to repeat that. It's all on you and what you want to do with it. We're going to help and empower you to share this story with your own personal networks and connections. We're also going to give you the opportunity to work with MoveOn to share it far and wide across the nation. So much opportunity. And now I'm going to show you what this website looks like, give you a quick rundown, just so we all don't have any problems with the technology. It's real easy. The first thing you're going to do is see step 1. Step 1 is going to have the link to the toolkit right there. It's the blue color. And then it's going to have some sample stories underneath these quick tips. I'm going to read out quickly what these quick tips are. They are to 1, be yourself, introduce who you are, what it is that's bringing you here in this story, be genuine, be authentic. Let us know, what it is, your why. When you tell people your why, the most important thing to do is to speak from the heart. People don't want just more details and facts about policies. They want to hear reasons they should care about joining in your why. And then you want to just keep it simple. It doesn't have to be big and long. It could be 10 minutes, but it could also be a minute, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. It's however you want to present this information. It's your experience. It's your lived truth. That's valuable in itself. So just run with the wind on that one. So step 2 is actually going to tell you exactly how to craft your story. If you want to record a video, that's great. We'll accept an MP4 file. If you want to do audio, MP3 file, writing a poem, a narrative, or other text story, you can upload a PDF or a doc, or you can directly input text on our website. And if you have artwork or photography, a play, anything that you want to share, it's a creative form of activism. We're accepting all sorts of stories. And if you have any trouble at all, at any point in time, you can email us at help@moveon.org, or on the website, you can literally just click there where it says click here to contact us, and we'll make it work together. And then when you do share your story, this is what it looks like, y'all. Choose file right there is where you'll click to upload the story. Right under it, you can type in some information to tell us more about who you are. Below, you'll have our story release agreement just to know all the sharing permissions. Again, I'm going to reiterate, we don't do a single thing without your permission. We want to empower you. That's what it's about, because your voice matters. And with that, I want to thank you and re-emphasize that at the link above that's pinned, moveon.org/mymoveonstory, you can go to this website and read all about it. And I'll open the floor to more questions if anyone has any. I see Amir said he's going to do an MP3 audio file. Who wants to see his face? I want to see your face, Amir. I think it's lovely. Sandy's going to take some pictures later. Okay, exciting. Let us know, y'all. Yeah, like what do you want? If you could share any story, what would it be? And also, if you have any questions, do let us know. To get coaching now, there sure is. That's my next follow-up. So I don't know if you all are familiar, but when you look at the top of your screen in that panel, you can see a button that says booths. When you click booths, you can also find our storytelling booth. Immediately after this session, we're gonna open up that storytelling booth, and there you're gonna find myself and a lot of our Move On storytelling team coaches to help talk help you like rehearse, talk through, give feedback, much like we saw Dylan and Miss Evelyn do. This is a great opportunity for y'all to prep and prepare what you might share later on the website. If you do not feel comfortable at this moment to share your story, if you feel like you still need some rehearsal, some practice before submitting a rough draft or whatever, this is a great place to do that. And I would love it if you all would also go to this link here. It's moveon.org/story pledge. That's moveon.org/story pledge. And there you can just give us your contact information so that we can circle back up with you and work through what you might want your story to be. So, storytelling booth, story pledge, and moveon.org/mymoveonstory. Any other questions? I expect to see a lot of you in the storytelling booth. I know your names now. I've been seeing the chat. We're friends now. You gotta come say hi. All right. Alyssa, any closing remarks from you?
No, this has been a joy. I love teaching people's personal story, and I'm so glad that you all have such a vehicle to implement it. If there's anything else that Rising Organizers Action can do to support you, please reach out to us. I'll drop our website in the chat. And you can always contact us through the website, and I'm happy to help you. But of course, you've got such a wonderful built-in team here at Move On. I just want to make myself available if anybody wants a new friend.
All right. With that, y'all, we thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Incredible. See you in the storytelling booth. See you on the website. Share your voices, share your stories. I can't reiterate enough that sometimes it really just takes one person to make someone feel like they matter, like what they've experienced matters, like what they have to say matters. You can be that one person. I've seen it happen. It's transformative. It's life-changing. Take that with you. Spread it far and wide. And I'll see you soon.